My name is Ralph Williams. I've wanted to do this video series for a while, but for whatever reason I've kept putting it off. But with the events that have happened over the course of the last couple of weeks, I think it's time to go ahead and get this out there. I'm like a lot of other people. I really did not expect that Donald Trump would be elected as President of the United States. I was surprised, as everybody else was, on the night of the election when the New York Times, of all medias, called the election somewhere between 11 and 12 o'clock midnight, before all the precincts had reported and all the ballots had been counted. The thing that's really amazed me, though, over the course of the year has not been the election itself, but it's been the reaction of people to the election. I don't think even the 2000 election between George W. Bush and Al Gore Jr. was as hotly debated as the election of 2016. And it still amazes me the number of people here a year and a half later who are saying, "Not my president." If you look back over the last year and a half at all the accusations leveled against him, it's a wonder that President Trump has any supporters left. And that's the subject of tonight's video. Why is Donald Trump so popular among his voters? And why is he so hated by everybody else, Democrats and Republicans alike? And just so you know, you're not going to get those answers from the mainstream media or from members of Congress or anybody else. I don't see a lot of people who have a clue about it. Just to help you out, here's a roadmap for this series of videos. Tonight's video is going to discuss the popularity of Donald Trump. The second video is going to discuss Donald Trump's America, what he means when he says, "Make America Great Again." The third video is going to address a growing concern that I have regarding the future of the Republican Party in America. And for the record, I believe the Republican Party is in trouble. The fourth video will provide a look at a new political model, and it's also going to address the need to redefine our terms, and fast. The terms conservative and liberal, Republican and Democrat, and even right and left no longer have any meaning in today's political free-for-all. The fifth video discusses something that is a little bit more insidious, and it deals a little bit more with the history of what's going on in our country and why things have taken the nasty turn that they've taken. There may be a sixth and seventh video, but for the time being, I haven't decided yet, and it just depends on how far I want to wade out into muddy waters. So for the task at hand, I've interacted with a lot of people, talked it over, and both online and in person. And I'm trying to get a grasp of what makes Donald Trump so popular among his voters. My initial thought was why people hate him so much. And the thing that amazes me is that the people who hate him are the ones that should love him, and the people who love him are the ones who should be hating him. But before we can get to that question, we need to address a question of politics in general in our country. If you look at American politics over the last 40 to 50, 60 years, you get the impression that there is an ebb and flow. The Democrats win for a while, the Republicans win for a while. Sometimes one has the White House and the other Congress. Sometimes one has the House and the other has the Senate. But by and large, things just keep going. Bills get passed and repealed. Executive orders get written and rescinded. And it just goes back and forth. We see that there's just kind of an ebb and flow in this thing that we call politics. And that's the way that we've done business over the last 30, 40, 50 years or more. But I think that there is another group of people who have been looking around, and they see the situation that we have in our country, and they're thinking to themselves, something is just not right. Something's missing. Something has changed. And even though they can't put their finger on whatever it is, they know that it's there. And they are of the opinion that something is trying to change our society right down to its core. And it's not just about the change. It's about what's replacing our culture. The very fabric of our country is being torn. There appears to be an all-out war on the culture that we call the American way of life. Not even Superman stands for truth, justice, and the American way anymore. We watched with horror, amazement, and embarrassment as our previous president went on the American Presidential World Apology Tour of 2009 and 2010, which actually pretty much extended throughout the duration of his presidency. And by the way, to all those who currently say about Donald Trump, not my president, I have to say about President Obama, not my apology. We have watched with sadness and horror as historical statues and monuments have been torn down, and scores and even hundreds of years of history have been destroyed in a heartbeat. It's true that some of our past has some sordid moments, things we would rather not remember, but remembrance of those moments is what keeps us from repeating them. Seeing other people come into this country and fly flags instead of ours, or they fly them equal to ours, and yet they enjoy the benefits and the blessings that come from living in this great country, and all the while they burn our flag and they talk about what's wrong with this country and how bad or evil it is. It's surreal and it's heartbreaking, and those who are looking on don't understand what's happening or who's responsible. If you believe there is an ebb and flow and things are just kind of going along, then you might have been happy if you were a Democrat with Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders. If you're a Republican, you might have liked John Kasich or Jeb Bush, especially if you prefer someone with a bit more polish or decorum. If you're a business owner, you might have preferred Carly Fiorina. If you wanted a little more radical change, you might have preferred Ted Cruz or even Paul Ryan. But if you're part of what I think is a growing segment of our society that believes we are in an all-out culture war, and it's a culture war that we run the risk of losing, then it seems to me that you can't help but gravitate toward Donald Trump, or at least his platform of Make America Great Again. Why is that? Well, I have a few ideas. First of all, Donald Trump is neither a Republican nor Democrat. If you go back and you look at old photographs, pictures, he seems to rub shoulders far more often with left-wing people than right-wing. He is seen far more often with Democrats than Republicans. He has aligned himself far more often with liberals than conservatives. And in fact, one of the objections that I heard from conservatives over and over in the 2016 election is, he's not a conservative. And they were right. He's not a Republican by any stretch of the imagination. And I would have thought that would have made Democrats, at least moderate Democrats, happy. I've come to believe since then that there are no moderate Democrats left within the Democrat Party, but that's also in video number 5. But as much as he's not a Republican, Donald Trump is not a Democrat either. He's not a leftist. And we're going to talk in a future video about those terms and why they may not be of value anymore. But for now, we can say in a traditional sense that he is not a liberal. So if he's not a Republican and he's not a Democrat, then what is he? Well, short answer, he's a businessman. And he's a businessman before he is anything else. That means that he has a stake in the game. He runs the risk of losing something. If you listen to the way that he talks, he says this is a bad deal for America, or we need to negotiate a better deal. It's not just a plug for his book. It's the way that he actually thinks. It is his view of politics from a business point of view. He also refuses to tie himself to one side or the other. This is what keeps the Republicans just as crazy as the Democrats. He's donating his salary, which is more symbolic than anything else. It's not like it's going to make or break him. But it still is his way of saying that he's not going to be beholden to anyone. If he's not receiving a salary, then he has a certain leeway to do things the way that he wants to do them. If you go back to the ebb and flow perspective for a moment, I think it's easier for us to understand why nothing gets done in Washington, D.C. If you think about the formation of a committee, if you've ever been in a church or you've worked in a business that functions with committees, It helps us to understand how Washington, D.C. operates. If you think about it, in a perfect world, a committee is formed to carry out a particular task. It does the job and then it's dissolved. That's not like there are standing committees like finance committees or maintenance committees, but those are committees that are formed for oversight, not problem solving. Problem solving committees are formed for a particular task, and in a perfect world, they have a shelf life. They die. In reality, though, people are appointed or elected to these particular positions. They're given a salary, they're given resources and a modicum of power. And so if the problem gets fixed, these resources all go away and a new round of job searches begins. And so the best approach of a committee is to fix at a problem, not fix the problem itself. Make it look like progress is being made, but don't actually make enough progress so that the problem goes away entirely. Meanwhile, you have to convince everyone else, everyone being the voters, that the problem is much bigger than we initially thought. And if this committee goes away, then the problem is so big that it's going to absolutely overwhelm us. And everybody on the committee is absolutely necessary to address the situation. In fact, these people are brought in with a special skill set to fix the problem, and they are unbelievably essential. Now, of course, that skill set may be nothing more than that they are the brother-in-law of the chairperson or the girlfriend of one of the other members, or more likely they simply have the ability to frame the problem correctly and secure funding for the committee. And in fact, before we're done addressing the problem, we're going to need more members and more resources to address this issue appropriately and completely. And oh, by the way, here's our revised budget for the rest of the year. And surprise of all surprises, it's more than what we thought it would be. An example of this is the current immigration and border crisis that we're seeing the last couple of weeks. This whole issue of separating families at the border, this is not a new issue. In fact, it's the result of repeated failure to enforce a law that goes back as far as 1997 under the Clinton administration. And later it was codified as law under the Bush administration. So it's both a Democrat and a Republican issue that has been fixed at to the point that it's completely broken and has no hope of actually being fixed without new legislation. That's the way that Washington works. And by the way, it's also my prediction that this is the news of the week, and we will not be hearing about it much longer. Give it 2 weeks and the topic of the day will be something entirely different. We won't even remember the problems we had at the border. More on that in video number 5. So back to Donald Trump. As a businessman, he's been frustrated by bureaucracy and red tape that goes along with working with government agencies. He's experienced ineptitude and inefficiency that goes along with what he does in real estate and zoning, a host of other problems that contractors and salespeople experience on a regular basis. Now keep in mind that government is not all bad. It does create a lot of loopholes that allows a successful businessman to take advantage of these loopholes and make a lot of money. And Donald Trump has done very well at what he does. And the same government that frustrates him also benefits him, just as it does to anybody who takes time to understand the system and learn how to play the game according to its rules. But generally, the ineptitude and red tape produce a stagnation that results in endless gridlock. That's where Donald Trump's pledge to drain the swamp comes into play. He sees the current condition of Congress as a bad deal for the American people. And Congress understands what that means, even if the average voter does not completely get it. Congress works like a committee. They fix at the problems. And remember to keep the main thing the main thing. And so the question is, well, what is the main thing? Excuse me. Well, that's what we, the voters, have to keep in mind. The primary job of every member of Congress is not to legislate or pass laws. The primary job of every member of Congress is to get reelected. That's their primary task. Everything else comes in at a distant second place to that. Congress does not understand the concept of having to actually work for a living. Rather, they raid the coffers of the American public, give themselves raises, and talk about how difficult their lives and responsibilities are. As much as they whipped up the American public over the 1%, what they did not tell us is that they are the 1%. And this goes for Democrats and Republicans alike. One of the things I'm looking for in the candidates of the 2018 midterms elections is their commitment to term limits for Congress. If they're not willing to enact term limits, I'm not willing to vote for them. But I digress. The politicians in Washington, D.C. have lived under a system for decades that allows them to get away with virtually anything, even murder, and not be prosecuted. They're not even held accountable for not being present or voting, which is their primary job, their real primary job. And think about what would happen if you or I just decided, I don't want to show up for work today. When Donald Trump talks about draining the swamp, he's stabbing at the heart of what many of them believe to be an entitlement system that applies to only them. So they are angry because he threatens to take all that apart, Republican and Democrat alike. His value system is just not the same as theirs. So when you take these two phenomena, the culture war that the left is waging on the American way of life, and the war that the elitists in Washington, D.C. have declared on the American citizens with all its hypocrisy, these are two fronts that hardworking American citizens have been unable to fight for themselves, primarily because they're all too busy working and they all have jobs. And these are two huge battlefronts that have flanked us. And we don't have the money, and we don't have the resources, and we don't have the know-how to fight this war. So in the midst of all of this, along comes a candidate who says, let's make America great again. Let's preserve this culture. Let's take it back from those who are rewriting its history and tearing down its statues. And let's also protect it from those who have been entrusted with its welfare and well-being but have betrayed that trust by raping its citizenry and denying them the representative republic that was established by the Founding Fathers. Let's make America great again. Let's reestablish the values that have made America what it has been up to this point. Let's reestablish the culture that has been torn down over the last 30 to 40 years. Let's support our military. Let's support the working class. Let's support the average American. Let's make America great again. And that's a theme that resounds not just in the eyes and the ears of those who hear it, but in the hearts of those who believe that this country is still worth fighting for, which I think is the majority of Americans. I think that is why Donald Trump is so popular among his voters. Even though he is rough around the edges, and he can be childish as well as brutish, he says the things that his voters would like to be saying for themselves. And at the end of the day, Donald Trump is the last statesman left in this country. He's not a politician. And the mainstream media, the postmodern left, Congress, and the people who built their case on the platitudes that we've heard over the last several decades, talking about you, Republicans, and others who can find little or nothing good in this country, they're going to continue to get it wrong. I'm Ralph Williams, and that's the view from my front porch.